velvet dark, of a sterile laboratory where the only sound is the rhythmic, low-frequency hum of a refrigerated centrifuge. A single drop of crimson liquid rests beneath the cold gaze of a microscope. Within this tiny, suspended world, a silent and ancient war is being fought. A biological conflict that defies the very fundamental laws of nature as we have come to understand them. In every other corner of the animal kingdom, from the deepest trenches of the ocean to the highest mountain peaks, the womb is a sanctuary, a place where the mother's body recognizes the life within it as its own purpose for existence. Yet, for a small and mysterious portion of the human population, the body views its own unborn child not as a legacy, but as a hostile invader, a viral presence to be identified, surrounded, and systematically destroyed. This is the biological paradox of the Rhesus negative blood type, a phenomenon where the internal chemistry of a mother can turn against the very life she is carrying, creating a microscopic battlefield that science still struggles to fully reconcile with the slow, logical march of evolution. What if I told you that according to the strict rules of Darwinian survival, the 15% of humans who carry this blood should not exist, and that their presence among us points to a broken link in the chain of our origins that no textbook has ever quite managed to repair? If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly what this is for, so get comfortable, maybe subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing Tokyo at dawn, London at midnight, all experiencing the same mystery together. The fluorescent lights of the late-night research wing cast long, flickering shadows against the stainless steel surfaces, mirroring the way our scientific understanding of blood has flickered between clarity and deep, unsettling shadow for nearly a century. We often think of blood as a simple, universal essence, the red river that connects us all to a single, shared ancestor. Yet the reality beneath the lens is far more fragmented. In 1937, Karl Landsteiner and Alexander Wiener sat in a room much like this one, surrounded by the scent of ozone and glass cleaner. Peering into the hidden architecture of the human cell, they were looking for the reason why certain blood transfusions succeeded, while others ended in a violent, clumping death within the veins. What they found was a protein, an antigen they named after the Rhesus macaque monkeys they were using for their research. This protein, the D antigen, was present in the vast majority of the human race, the Rhesus positives. But as they continued their work into the deep, quiet hours of the night, they realized that a specific group of individuals was entirely missing this protein. They were not merely a different type. They were characterized by a void, an absence of a trait that seemed universal to nearly every other primate on the planet. In the machinery of the natural world, mutations usually occur to provide an advantage or as a neutral drift over vast spans of time. Yet the Rh negative factor appeared as a sudden, sharp deviation. When an Rh negative mother carries an Rh positive child, the first pregnancy often passes in a fragile peace. But the moment the blood of the child touches the blood of the mother during birth, the mother's immune system awakens. It registers the Rhesus protein as a foreign threat, much like a bacterium or a deadly pathogen. It creates antibodies, tiny, specialized hunters designed to seek out and neutralize that specific protein. In any subsequent pregnancy, these antibodies cross the placental barrier, the very wall meant to protect the developing life, and they begin to dismantle the child's red blood cells. This is hemolytic disease, a condition that, before modern medical intervention, resulted in a tragic cycle of loss that seemed to suggest the mother's body was literally rejecting the evolutionary path of the father. It is an occurrence that is virtually non-existent in any other species, unless two entirely different species are forced to interbreed, leading many to wonder why nature would allow such a self-sabotaging trait to persist in the human gene pool for 50,000 years. The glass slides on the lab bench reflect the pale moonlight coming through the high windows, and one cannot help but feel the weight of the millions of years that led to this specific, quiet moment. Evolution is typically a builder. It adds layers of protection. It refines the ability of a species to replicate and thrive. The existence of the Rh negative factor feels like a deliberate subtraction, a sudden removal of a biological signature that links us to the rest of the primate world. While 85% of the global population carries the Rhesus protein, a silent connection to the monkeys of the old world, the 15% who lack it stand as a biological enigma. They are the negatives, defined by what they are not. This absence is not localized to one small tribe or one tiny village. It is scattered across the globe, though it clusters with haunting intensity in specific, ancient corridors of the earth. We are taught that we all crawled out of the same primordial cradle, yet the blood in our veins suggests a more complex, perhaps even fractured, genealogy. Looking out over the darkened city, where millions of people are sleeping, their hearts pumping these different chemical signatures through their bodies, the scale of the mystery becomes almost overwhelming. Inside each of us is a library of information, a coded history that predates our memories, our languages, and even our oldest ruins. Most of this code is shared, a testament to our common struggle against the ice and the predators of the ancient plains. But the Rh negative factor is a missing page in that library, a chapter that was perhaps torn out or rewritten by a force we have yet to identify. It is a biological signature that seems to ignore the geographical boundaries we have drawn on our maps, appearing in high concentrations among the Basque of the Pyrenees, the Berbers of the Atlas Mountains, and the Celtic lineages of the windswept Atlantic coasts. It is as if a specific group of humans was marked by a different fire, a different origin, that left them with a chemistry that is fundamentally at odds with the majority. The modern medical world has developed ways to silence this biological conflict, using injections to mask the mother's immune response, effectively tricking the body into ignoring the invader. We have smoothed over the friction with the grace of contemporary science, but the friction itself remains a profound philosophical question. If the Rh positive factor is the natural state of the primate lineage, then where did the negative factor come from? It does not appear to be a simple recessive mutation that provides a survival benefit in the way that sickle cell trait protects against malaria. Instead, it is a trait that, in its natural state, actively works against the survival of the next generation. In the cold, objective light of biology, this is a dead-end trait, something that should have been extinguished by the harsh pressures of natural selection eons ago. And yet, it has not only survived, it has thrived in certain populations, persisting through the rise and fall of empires, through the migrations of tribes, and through the long, slow cooling of the earth. we find ourselves standing on the edge of a vast, dark ocean of time, looking at the ripples left behind by ancestors whose names have been lost to the wind. The laboratory, with its precise measurements and its clear-cut data, provides us with the how of the blood's behavior, but it remains silent on the why. We can map the antigens, we can count the antibodies, and we can observe the microscopic dance of rejection and acceptance. But we cannot find the moment in the fossil record where the protein simply vanished. There is no transitional form, no gradual fading of the Rhesus factor in our ancient cousins. It is as if 50,000 years ago, a line was drawn in the sand, and a portion of humanity stepped across it, leaving behind a piece of their primate heritage to become something else, something subtly but undeniably different. The silence of the night seems to deepen as we contemplate the fragility of our own definitions of what it means to be human. We are a single species capable of love, art, and complex thought, yet our very blood reveals a hidden diversity that hints at a much more chaotic and mysterious past than the linear progression we are taught in school. As the centrifuge finally slows to a stop and the lab settles into a profound, heavy stillness, the samples of Rh negative blood remain a quiet challenge to our understanding. They are a reminder that within the most intimate parts of our physical selves, there are secrets that have traveled through the ages, carried by survivors who moved through the shadows of history. The paradox of the mother and the child is not just a medical curiosity. It is a whisper from a distant era, a signpost pointing toward a truth about our origins that is still waiting to be decoded. Time itself seems to stretch and thin in this quiet hour, reminding us that we are all walking mysteries, carrying the echoes of a 50,000-year-old secret in every beat of our hearts, a secret that remains written in a language of salt and iron, flowing through the dark, deep in the humid, dappled canopy of the Himalayan foothills. The Rhesus macaque moves with a nimble, prehistoric grace that has remained largely unchanged for millions of years. This small, amber-furred primate carries within its veins a specific molecular signature, a protein anchored to the surface of its red blood cells like a tiny biological flag. For nearly a century, this creature has lent its name to one of the most profound mysteries of human biology, serving as the mirror in which we see our own reflection and the jarring, inexplicable cracks within it. When we speak of being Rh negative, we are acknowledging a deep ancestral tether to this lineage, a genetic inheritance that spans the vast gulf between species. 85% of the human family carries this Rhesus factor, a consistent thread of continuity that suggests a smooth, logical progression from the primates of the old world to the modern inhabitants of our glass and steel cities. It is a biological yes, a confirmation that we belong to the great, interconnected tree of life that has flourished on this planet since the dawn of mammalian time. Yet, as we move away from the lush forests and into the colder, more shadowed corridors of our own genetic history, that yes, suddenly and without warning, becomes a no. In the grand ledger of evolution, where every trait is usually accounted for through the slow, meticulous accumulation of survival advantages, the appearance of the Rh negative factor feels like a sudden erasure, a missing line of code that simply vanished from the human record roughly 50,000 years ago. In the world of molecular biology, we call this the deletion of the Rhd gene. While the majority of humanity possesses two functional genes that produce the Rhesus protein, the Rh negative individual possesses a void where that protein should be. It is not a mutation that altered the protein's shape or function. It is a total absence, a genetic ghost that leaves the cell surface smooth and unmarked. This is not how evolution typically works. Usually, there's a trail, a series of transitional forms, a gradual fading, or a clear environmental pressure that favors the change. But here, the trail goes cold, buried under 50 millennia of dust and silence. If we were to look back through a telescope into the Upper Paleolithic, a time when the Earth was locked in the icy grip of the last glacial period, we would see small bands of humans navigating a world of mammoths and shifting tundras. This was a time of immense transition, an era when the Great Leap Forward saw the sudden emergence of complex art, sophisticated tools, and the first whispers of symbolic thought. It is within this specific window of time that the Rh negative factor seems to have made its silent debut. Science can trace the mitochondrial DNA of our mothers and then the Y chromosomal lineages of our fathers back to ancient African hearths. Yet the Rhesus negative deletion does not follow the same clear ancestral map. It does not appear in the oldest lineages of the Sand People or the deep ancestral roots of the African continent with any significant frequency. Instead, it seems to emerge like a localized anomaly, a sudden divergence in the blood that occurred just as humanity began to fan out across the Eurasian landmass, defying the very primate heritage that had defined our biology for millions of years. The hum of the modern world fades as we consider the sheer improbable nature of this survival. In the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Stone Age, life was a brutal calculation of energy and reproduction. Any genetic trait that hindered the ability of a mother to successfully rear multiple children should have been ruthlessly pruned by the hand of natural selection. And yet, the Rh negative factor persisted, a silent passenger in the blood of nomadic tribes as they crossed the land bridges of a frozen world. There is no evidence in the fossilized remains of our earlier ancestors, the Australopithecines, or even the early Homo erectus, to suggest they lacked this protein. They were, as far as we can tell, universally positive, sharing that molecular bond with the macaques and the great apes. The break in the chain happens much later, closer to us in time, yet further away in our ability to explain it through the traditional lens of Darwinian gradualism. The geneticists who spend their lives peering into the dark spaces between our genes find themselves at a peculiar crossroads when it came to the Rhd gene deletion. They can see the exact breakpoint in the DNA, the place where the code was severed, but they cannot find the patient zero of this transformation. In most genetic stories, we can find a reason for a mutation. Perhaps it protected against a plague, or allowed for better oxygen absorption in high altitudes. But the absence of the Rhesus protein offers no such obvious benefit. In fact, as we have seen, it creates a biological friction that threatens the very continuity of the bloodline. To find such a high percentage of this trait in specific modern populations, like the people of the Basque country or the Celtic fringes of Europe, suggests that at some point in our distant past, being negative was not a disadvantage, but perhaps a marker of a group that lived in such extreme isolation that the normal rules of genetic flow were suspended as the constellations shift slowly in the night sky, mirroring the slow migration of genes across the surface of the Earth. We are forced to wonder if we are looking at a mutation at all, or perhaps a remnant of a hybridization that has long since been obscured by the fog of time. We know now that our ancestors did not walk alone. They shared the world with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and perhaps other ghost populations of hominids whose DNA still whispers in our own. Yet, when we sequence the genomes of Neanderthals recovered from the freezing caves of Siberia, we find they were predominantly Rh negative. The mystery does not resolve, it only deepens, pushing the origin of the negative factor further into the realm of the unexplained. The missing evolutionary bridge between the protein-carrying primate and the protein-lacking human remains unbuilt, a gap in the architecture of our species that no amount of fossil hunting has yet managed to fill. There is a certain melancholy in the realization that we may never truly see the face of the first human whose blood ran negative, the individual in whom the ancient primate connection was finally severed. We are left only with the statistical echoes, the patterns of migration, and the strange, lingering biological anomalies that define the 15%. We are a species of amnesiacs, carrying within our very cells the evidence of a massive, fundamental shift that occurred before we had the words to record it. The Rhesus connection, so stable and universal for millions of years, was broken in a heartbeat of geological time, leaving us with a blood type that acts as a silent witness to a history we are still trying to remember. The weight of this missing history hangs heavy in the air, much like the stillness of a forest after the wind has died down. We often pride ourselves on having mapped the human genome, on having unraveled the double helix until every A, T, C, and G is accounted for. Yet the simple presence of a nothing, where there should be a something, remains one of our most humbling enigmas. It suggests that our origins are not a straight line, but a tangled web of events, some so strange and so sudden that they defy the slow, rhythmic pulse of traditional evolution. We carry the Rhesus macaque's legacy in the majority of our hearts, but for those who do not, the absence of that protein is a quiet, persistent reminder that there are chapters of the human story that remain unread, tucked away in the microscopic folds of our existence. In the deep stillness of the night, the boundaries between the past and the present seem to dissolve, leaving us only with the pulse of the blood and the vast, unanswered questions it carries. We are a collection of lineages that have crossed oceans and survived ice ages, each of us a vessel for a chemical code that has been passed from hand to hand through the darkness of 50,000 years. And as we drift further from the certainties of the textbook, we begin to realize that the most profound mysteries are not hidden in the stars or at the bottom of the sea, but within the very fluid that sustains us, a silent river of memory that continues to flow, indifferent to our struggle to name its source. The gap in the bridge is not a failure of science, but a testament to the sheer, breathtaking complexity of the human journey, a journey that began with a shared protein and led to a world where some of us carry a void that is, in itself, a profound and enduring legacy. The transition from the primate world to the human one was not a single step, but a series of stumbles and leaps, some of which left scars on our very DNA, the Rh negative factor, is one such scar, or perhaps it is a signature, a mark of a moment when the human story took a sharp and unexpected turn into the unknown. We look at the Rhesus macaque and see our past, but in the smooth, antigen-free cells of the Rh negative, we see a question mark that refuses to be erased by the passage of time or the advancement of our understanding. It is a reminder that even in an age of total information, there are parts of ourselves that remain as wild and as mysterious as the ancient tundras where this story first began. A silent part of our being that remembers a different beginning, one that the rest of the world has forgotten. The history of our species is written in many languages, in stone, in bone, and in the shifting patterns of our languages. But none is as intimate or as enduring as the language of the blood. It is a narrative that requires no translation, a constant, rhythmic accounting of who we were and who we have become. And in the quiet, lonely hours of the night, when the rest of the world has fallen away, we can almost hear the heartbeat of those 50,000 years, a long, steady cadence that connects us to the first of the negatives, those ancient travelers who stepped out of the light of the known primate world and into a mystery that we are still, even now, only beginning to contemplate. Our lineage is a tapestry with threads that vanish and reappear in ways we cannot yet predict, leaving us to wonder what else might be hidden in the gaps, waiting for the right moment to be revealed by the slow, inexorable turning of the clock. We are the sum of all the connections we have kept and all the ones we have let go, a living paradox moving through the stream of time, carrying the weight of an ancestry that is both perfectly clear and deeply, hauntingly obscure. The mist clings to the jagged limestone peaks of the Pyrenees like a tattered, ancient shroud, moving through the deep, emerald valleys with a silence that feels older than the mountains themselves. Here, in the rugged borderlands between what we now call France and Spain, the air is thick with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, and the very stones seem to vibrate with the weight of a history that refuses to be forgotten. This is the heart of the Basque country, a geographical fortress that has served as a sanctuary for a people whose origins remain one of the most profound puzzles in the story of our species. As the sun dips below the granite horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the ancient terraced hills, we find ourselves at the center of the world's most concentrated genetic anomaly. It is here that the Rhesus negative blood type reaches its zenith, appearing in nearly 35% of the population, a frequency so high that it transforms this small, resilient pocket of humanity into a biological island, a living relic of a time before the great migrations reshaped the face of the European continent. In the quiet, stone-walled villages where the evening light flickers against iron-gray shutters, the language spoken is not Spanish, nor is it French, nor does it bear any resemblance to the Latin, Germanic, or Slavic tongues that dominate the rest of the Western world. This is Euskara, a language isolate that stands alone, without a single known linguistic relative on the entire planet, while the rest of Europe shares a common Indo-European root, a vast, sprawling tree of dialects that can be traced back to the steppes of the East. Euskara is a forest of one. It is a linguistic ghost, a remnant of the Neolithic, or perhaps even the Paleolithic era, spoken by a people who were already settled in these valleys, when the first builders of Stonehenge were still wandering the plains. To hear Euskara spoken in the dim light of a mountain tavern is to listen to the echoes of an era that science tells us should have vanished 10,000 years ago. A sound that bridges the gap between the modern age and a primordial past. The connection between this unique language and the high concentration of Rh negative blood is not a mere coincidence of geography. It is a signature of profound isolation. For millennia, while the rest of the world was a churning cauldron of conquest, interbreeding, and cultural erasure, the Basque people remained tucked within the folds of their mountain stronghold. They watched as the Romans marched past, as the Visigoths swept through the lowlands, and as the Moors reached toward the north, yet they remained biologically and linguistically distinct. Their blood, rich with the absence of the Rhesus protein, acted as a silent barrier, a genetic sentinel that preserved a specific ancient lineage. In the cool, damp air of the Pyrenean caves, where the walls are still marked by the charcoal drawings of bison and horses, one could almost feel the continuity of life, a pulse of existence that has remained largely untouched by the outside world for 50,000 years. When we look at the genetic map of Europe, it is usually a blurred watercolor of shifting populations, but the Basque region appears as a sharp, high-contrast ink blot. Scientists who study the migration of early humans find that the genetic distance between the Basque and their neighbors is greater than the distance between many ethnic groups, separated by entire oceans. This suggests that we are not looking at a group that simply moved into the mountains, but a group that may have been the original inhabitants of the continent, a relict population that survived the arrival of the farmers from the east and the warriors from the north. They are the descendants of the hunter-gatherers who followed the retreating ice sheets, carrying with them a blood chemistry that was already established before the concept of nations or empires ever crossed the human mind. The fortress of the Pyrenees was not built of stone, but of a fierce internal consistency, a refusal to let the stream of their unique biology be diluted by the rising tide of the majority. The absence of the Rhesus protein in such a large segment of this population creates a strange, quiet tension in the medical records of the region. For generations before the advent of modern immunology, the biological paradox we discussed earlier, the rejection of the child by the mother, must have been a frequent and somber visitor to these valleys. One might expect that such a disadvantage would lead to the eventual disappearance of the Rh negative factor. Yet it persisted here with a stubbornness that defies the standard models of evolutionary biology. It raises the question of whether there was an unseen benefit to this blood type in the specific environment of the ancient Pyrenees, a hidden shield against a forgotten disease or a physical resilience that allowed these individuals to thrive where others faltered. Or perhaps, more philosophically, it suggests that the human story is not always about the survival of the most compatible, but sometimes about the survival of the most distinct. As the night deepens and the stars begin to peer through the gaps in the mountain clouds, the scale of this isolation becomes a mirror for our own understanding of human time. We measure history in centuries and decades, in the reigns of kings and the discovery of technologies. But the Basque bloodline measures time in glacial cycles. To be Rh negative in this landscape is to carry a physical memory of the world as it was before the forest replaced the tundra, before the first grain was sown in the earth. The language of Euskara is the soundtrack to this memory, a series of sounds that were formed to describe a world that no longer exists, a world of mammoths, of different constellations, and of a human experience that was far more intimate with the raw, cold pulse of the planet. The ruggedness of the terrain provided more than just a physical defense. It created a psychological and biological crucible. In the deep valleys of Gipuzkoa and Vizcaya, the community was the universe. The laws of inheritance, the structure of the household, and the rituals of the seasons were all designed to maintain the adixia, the ancestral home. This cultural obsession with continuity mirrored the genetic continuity of their blood. They were not interested in the expansion of territory, but in the preservation of the essence. While the Indo-European tribes brought with them a culture of movement and assimilation, the Basque remained rooted like the ancient oaks that cling to the mountain slopes. This rootedness is the key to why the Rh negative factor did not merely survive here, but became a defining characteristic of the people. It was a choice made over hundreds of generations to remain within the fortress, to keep the blood pure of the Rhesus protein that marked the rest of the world. Looking at the Basque people through the lens of modern genetics is like looking at a star that is much older than the galaxy surrounding it. They are a point of light from a different era of human development, a reminder that the path of our species was not a single, unified march forward. There were offshoots, pockets of resistance, and experiments in biology that led to different ends. The high frequency of Rh negative blood here is the strongest evidence we have that the Rhesus positive world was not always the foregone conclusion of our evolution. It suggests that there was once a version of humanity where the negative was the norm, or at least a significant and powerful minority, and that the Basque are the last lingering survivors of that alternate history. They are the living control group in the great experiment of human existence, showing us what we might have been if the great migrations had never occurred. The silence of the Pyrenees at midnight is a heavy, contemplative thing, a silence that seems to absorb the sound of modern life and turn it back into myth. In this stillness, the distinction between the scientific and the mystical begins to blur. We can explain the Rh negative factor as a genetic deletion, and we can classify Euskara as a language isolate, but those labels do not capture the profound otherness that one feels in the presence of such ancient continuity. To be in the Basque country is to be reminded that the earth has a long memory, and that it keeps that memory in the most reliable vault it has: the bodies and the breath of the people who belong to it. The fortress is not a place of exclusion, but a place of preservation, a laboratory of time where a specific piece of the human puzzle has been kept safe from the eroding winds of change. We often think of ourselves as a globalized, homogenized species, yet the existence of the Basque and their unique blood suggests that the map of our origins is much more textured than we dare to admit. Every Rh negative individual, whether they are in a high-rise in Manhattan or a cottage in the Highlands, shares a tiny piece of this Pyrenean mystery, a genetic tether that pulls back toward these mist-covered peaks. It is a reminder that we are all composed of fragments of forgotten worlds, of lineages that survived against all odds, and of biological signatures that were written in the dark of the Stone Age. The high concentration of this blood in the Basque people is the North Star of this investigation, a fixed point that allows us to navigate the turbulent waters of our shared past as the moon hangs pale and cold over the jagged crests of the mountains. One can almost imagine the first negative tribes looking up at the same sky, feeling the same chill in the air, and speaking words in a language that would outlast empires. They were the original outsiders, the ones who did not fit the primate mold, and they found in these valleys a place where their difference could become their strength. The fortress of the Pyrenees did not just protect a people, it protected a secret, a biological and linguistic anomaly that continues to challenge everything we thought we knew about where we came from and how we arrived here. History is not just a collection of dates and events. It is the slow, steady accumulation of these moments of survival, these pockets of endurance that remind us that the human spirit is as varied and as deep as the blood that sustains it. The lights of the small mountain towns twinkle like fallen stars in the valley floors, a modern overlay on a landscape that has seen the rise and fall of countless suns. The people sleeping within those walls carry the weight of 50,000 years in their veins, a responsibility they did not ask for, but which they have upheld with a quiet, fierce dignity. The Rhesus negative factor is not a burden to them, but a part of the landscape of their lives, as familiar as the crags of the mountains and the rain that feeds the rivers. It is a silent testimony to the fact that some things are meant to endure, to remain unchanged even as the rest of the world transforms into something unrecognizable. Time, in the heart of the Basque country, does not move in a straight line, but in a circle, returning always to the same essential truths of identity and origin. There is a profound peace in the realization that we do not have all the answers, that there are still places on this earth where the mystery is allowed to breathe. The Basque people and their blood are a living question mark, a beautiful and haunting disruption in the narrative of human progress. They remind us that to be human is to be part of a story that is still being written, a story with chapters that are hidden in the folds of the mountains and the microscopic architecture of our cells. As the night wind whispers through the ancient oaks and the mist deepens in the valleys, we are left with a lingering sense that the past is never truly behind us, but is always flowing through us, a quiet river of blood and language that connects the fortress of the Pyrenees to the very ends of the earth. The mountains will remain, and the blood will continue its silent journey, a persistent and melancholic reminder of a time that time itself forgot. The cold, relentless spray of the North Atlantic crashes against the jagged basalt columns of the Giant's Causeway, a rhythmic percussion that has echoed for eons against the westernmost edges of Europe. Here, in the mist-shrouded Celtic fringe of Ireland and the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, the landscape feels like the very end of the world, a place where the land dissolves into a gray, churning infinity. In these remote corners, the frequency of Rhesus negative blood swells to nearly 30% of the population, a silent biological lighthouse standing guard on the periphery of the continent. It is a striking anomaly that mirrors the physical traits of the people who have called these crags home for millennia. The pale skin that drinks in the rare northern sun, the startling clarity of blue and green eyes, and the vibrant, copper-toned hair that has become a hallmark of the Gaelic lineage. This phenotype, the physical expression of a deep, ancient genetic code, is more than a matter of aesthetics. It is a map of a forgotten migration, a trail of breadcrumbs left by a group of humans who moved with the tides long before history had a name. Leaving the salt-sprayed crags of the Outer Hebrides behind, the current of our story pulls us southward, tracing the jagged edges of the continental shelf along the Atlantic facade. We drift past the rugged cliffs of Cornwall, the granite heaths of Brittany, and the windswept shores of Galicia in northern Spain. In each of these locations, the Rhesus negative factor remains stubbornly high, clinging to the coastlines like the hardy sea holly. For decades, historians assumed these people were simply the remnants of a Celtic wave that was pushed westward by the expansion of Rome or the migration of Germanic tribes. But the blood tells a different story, one that is much older and far more mysterious. Geneticists studying the Atlantic modal haplotype have found that the people of these western fringes are more closely related to one another than to the populations just a few hundred miles inland. They are the descendants of an ancient maritime culture, a lineage of sea kings who viewed the ocean not as a barrier, but as a highway, connecting the disparate ends of the earth through the shared language of the waves. The heat begins to shimmer over the horizon as we cross the Strait of Gibraltar, leaving the cool damp of the north for the scorched, amber peaks of the Atlas Mountains in North Africa. Here, among the Berber tribes, the Amazigh, or the Free People, the biological mystery takes an even more unexpected turn. In the Rif Mountains of Morocco, in the Kabylia region of Algeria, the Rhesus negative frequency surges once again, reaching levels that rival the Basque and the Celts of the far north. This is a startling disruption of the traditional African genetic narrative. The Berbers, with their distinct language and often lighter features, carry a blood signature that links them directly to the megalith builders of Western Europe. They are the southern anchor of a prehistoric network that spanned the entire Atlantic coast, a population that seems to have bypassed the inland routes of the Sahara to maintain a coastal existence that prioritized the sea. It is not only the blood that follows this coastal path, it is the very architecture of the earth itself. Across this vast maritime arc, from the massive passage tombs of Newgrange in Ireland to the stone circles of Brittany, and down to the ancient dolmens scattered across the Moroccan landscape, we see the same obsession with the monumental. These megaliths are the skeletal remains of a shared civilization, built with a mathematical precision that aligns with the solstices and the stars. They were not built by disparate, disconnected tribes. They were the work of a people with a unified vision, a culture that utilized the Rhesus negative bloodline as a core thread in its social fabric. The stones stand as silent witnesses to a time when the sea was the center of the world, and the people who navigated it carried a biological marker that set them apart from the farmers and hunters of the interior. The sun beats down on the dry, cracked earth of a Berber village, where the elders speak of a time when their ancestors arrived from the great water. Their legends speak of fair-skinned giants and powerful seafarers who brought the knowledge of the stars and the secrets of the earth. While we often dismiss such stories as myth, The presence of the Rhesus negative factor provides a grounding, scientific reality to these claims. This blood type does not drift into a population by accident. Its high concentration in such specific, geographically aligned locations suggests a deliberate movement of people, a maritime empire that existed 50,000 years ago, long before the rise of the pharaohs or the Greeks. These were the true Sea Kings, a group of humans whose chemistry was subtly different, whose bodies were tuned to a different frequency, and whose legacy is etched into both the stones of the coast and the cells of their descendants. The microscopic world of the blood cell and the macroscopic world of the megalith begin to merge into a single, cohesive narrative of survival. We often think of ancient migrations as slow, overland treks, but the distribution of the Rhesus negative factor suggests a rapid, waterborne expansion. By following the currents and the seasonal winds, these early mariners could have maintained a cohesive genetic identity across thousands of miles. They were a people of the edge, living where the three elements of earth, sea, and sky met. Their blood, lacking the Rhesus protein that linked the rest of humanity to the primates of the forest, may have been a symbol of their distinctness, a biological badge of their identity as the navigators of the unknown. In the deep, silent hours of the night, when the modern world feels like a fleeting dream, the permanence of the megaliths becomes almost haunting. We look at the Celtic Fringe and the Berber heartland not as separate regions, but as two ends of a bridge that time has tried to wash away. The 15% of humanity that carries this blood today are the living remnants of that bridge. They are the survivors of a world that existed before the dawn of recorded history, a world where the ocean was a sacred space and the blood was a sacred vessel. The Rhesus negative factor is the ink with which this hidden history was written, a script that science is only now beginning to translate, revealing a map of human movement that challenges every boundary we have ever drawn. The shadows of the dolmens grow long as the moon rises over the Atlas Mountains, mirroring the shadows cast by the standing stones of Scotland, thousands of miles apart. These structures are identical in their purpose and their majesty, much like the blood that flows through the people who still live in their shadows. We are forced to reconsider the great leap forward of human evolution, wondering if it was not a single event, but a series of arrivals. Different groups with different origins, colliding and merging to create the tapestry of modern humanity. The Rh-negative mariners were one such thread, a vibrant, resilient line of Sea Kings who refused to be forgotten, even as their ships rotted and their names faded into the mists of the Atlantic. The silence of the Saharan night is as profound as the silence of the Irish moors, a heavy, ancient stillness that suggests the earth itself is holding its breath. We are part of a lineage that has seen the stars change position and the seas rise to swallow entire continents. To carry the Rh-negative factor is to be a vessel for this endurance, a biological link to a group of humans who stared into the infinity of the ocean and decided to cross it. They were the ones who didn't fit, the ones whose bodies rebelled against the common primate heritage, and the ones who found a way to thrive on the very edges of existence. Their story is not one of conquest in the modern sense, but of a deep, elemental belonging to the planet's wildest spaces. History often feels like a solid, unmoving thing, a series of facts carved into stone. But the more we look at the realize that history is fluid. It is a river that changes course, a tide that pulls and pushes against the shores of our understanding. The red-haired sea kings and the Berber navigators are not ghosts. They are a presence that continues to shape our world from the shadows of our own DNA. We are the inheritors of their curiosity, their resilience, and their mystery. The stones may crumble and the languages may change, but the blood remains constant, a rhythmic reminder of a 50,000-year journey that is still unfolding in the quiet, darkened corners of the world. The transition from the ancient sea roots to the modern age is a journey of forgetting. Yet the body never truly forgets. Every time an Rh-negative mother is treated in a modern clinic, or every time a red-haired child is born in a Berber village, the ancient story reasserts itself. It is a narrative of difference, of survival, and of a connection that defies the logic of geography. We are the sum of all the miles our ancestors traveled, and for the 15%, those miles were mostly water. The Rhesus negative factor is the salt in the wound of our history, a sting that reminds us that we are not entirely who we think we are, and that our origins are tied to a horizon we have forgotten how to see. As the constellations turn in their slow, celestial dance, reflecting in the dark waters of both the North Sea and the Mediterranean, the scale of this ancient migration becomes a source of quiet awe. We are small, fleeting lives in the face of such vast timescales, yet we carry the entire history of the world within us. The sea kings may have vanished from the surface of the earth, but they are still sailing through the veins of their descendants, navigating the internal oceans of our biology with the same steady, unerring hand. The secret of the blood is not a puzzle to be solved, but a story to be felt, a long, melancholic song of the sea that continues to echo through the chambers of the human heart. The night air is still, and the world seems to have paused to listen to the whisper of the past. There is a comfort in this continuity, a sense that we are part of something that cannot be easily broken or erased. The Rhesus negative factor, with all its biological complexity and historical mystery, is a testament to the fact that humanity is a work in progress, a collection of stories that are still being told. We are the guardians of these secrets, the ones who carry the fire of the ancient sea kings into a future that is as uncertain as the waters they once sailed. In the end, we are all travelers, moving through the darkness toward a shore we can only imagine, guided by the silent, rhythmic pulse of a blood that remembers everything. As we leave the shores of the Atlantic and the peaks of the Atlas behind, the story of the Rh-negative bloodline continues its quiet, persistent flow. It is a reminder that the most significant parts of ourselves are often the ones we cannot explain, the parts that link us to a past we can no longer reach, and a future we have yet to build. The mystery remains a deep and enduring secret that science can only begin to touch, leaving us to wonder what other chapters of our history are still waiting to be discovered in the quiet, red rivers of our own existence. Time moves on, but the blood stays, a silent witness to the 50,000-year secret that science cannot yet explain. The cell membrane is a shimmering, microscopic frontier, a delicate lipid bilayer that separates the interior of our existence from the vast, chaotic world outside. It is here, on this invisible borderland, that the fundamental mechanics of the human body are either confirmed or rewritten. In the majority of the human race, these red blood cells are adorned with the Rhesus protein, a molecular structure that acts like a familiar handshake, allowing the body to recognize itself within the grand lineage of the primates. But for the Rh-negative individual, this landscape is smooth, unadorned, and strangely silent. This absence is not merely a missing piece of data. It is a shift in the very electrical conductivity of the blood itself. When we move past the broad strokes of history and into the granular reality of the human machine, we find that being Rh-negative is not just a blood type. It is a different way of existing within the physical realm, a subtle recalibration of the body's relationship with heat, light, and the passage of time. In the quiet, pre-dawn hours, when the world is at its coldest, the Rh-negative body often maintains a temperature that defies the standard medical charts. While we are taught that 98.6 degrees is the universal baseline of human life, many within this 15% find themselves living in a cooler internal climate, often resting at 97 degrees or even lower. This is not a malfunction, but a different metabolic rhythm, a slow-burning fire that suggests a body tuned for a different environment. Perhaps it is a legacy of the deep ice, an adaptation to a world where conserving energy was the only way to survive the long lunar nights of the Paleolithic. This lower resting temperature creates a physical sensation of being slightly other, a quiet, persistent reminder that the internal engine is running on a different grade of fuel, one that prioritizes a steady, enduring cool over the rapid, high-intensity heat of the majority. As the sun begins to crest the horizon, its light filtering through the atmosphere in long, golden waves, the sensory experience of the Rh-negative individual shifts once again. There is a documented statistical correlation between this blood type and an heightened sensitivity to the environment, a phenomenon sometimes referred to as the highly sensitive person trait. The pupils of the Rh-negative eye are often more reactive, dilating and contracting with a precision that makes the glare of a modern office or the harsh reflection of the midday sun feel almost physical, like a weight against the brow. This sensitivity extends beyond the eyes and into the ears, where the hum of a refrigerator or the distant drone of traffic is processed with a clarity that can be both a gift and a burden. It is as if the nervous system has been stripped of a layer of insulation, leaving the individual more attuned to the subtle vibrations of the world, a living antenna that picks up frequencies the rest of the world has learned to tune out. This heightened awareness is often mirrored in the physical architecture of the face and the hair. The genetic trail of the Rh-negative factor is frequently intertwined with the MC1R gene, the ancient mutation responsible for the vibrant spectrum of red and copper hair. This is not a random occurrence, but a clustering of traits that suggests a specific evolutionary path. The hair, often thick and infused with a metallic sheen, acts as a visual marker of this lineage, a copper crown that distinguishes the wearer from the black and brown tones of the global majority. Alongside this sits the mystery of the eyes, the hazel, the piercing blue, and the rare, shifting green. These are not just colors. They are the result of a specific scattering of light within the iris, a lack of heavy pigmentation that allows the eyes to change hue based on the mood of the sky or the clothes the person wears. To look into these eyes is to see a biological history that prioritized the absorption of light in the dim northern reaches of the world, a trait that became a permanent fixture of the Rh negative phenotype. The transition from the microscopic cell to the macroscopic physical form is a journey through a landscape of survival. Why would nature select for a body that is cooler, more sensitive, and more visibly distinct? In the ancient world, these traits may have served as the ultimate survival kit for the sentinel, the scout, or the healer. A lower body temperature could mean a higher resistance to certain bacteria that thrive in the heat of a fever. A heightened sensitivity to sound could mean hearing the snap of a twig long before a predator emerged from the brush. The physical markers, the pale skin that synthesizes vitamin D with incredible efficiency under a gray sky, the copper hair that signaled tribal identity, were not mere accidents. They were the tools of a group that lived on the periphery, a group whose very biology was designed to navigate the thin, cold spaces between the known and the unknown. There is an objective, biological reality to the Rh negative experience that moves beyond the realm of folklore. Medical studies have often noted a higher than average resistance to certain viral infections among this group, as if the absence of the Rhesus protein makes the cell a more difficult fortress for an invader to breach. Conversely, there is often a higher frequency of low blood pressure, a physiological state that contributes to the sense of calm detachment that many negatives describe. The body does not rush, it waits. It processes the world with a deliberate, analytical pace, mirroring the slow, rhythmic movement of the blood through the veins. This is the mechanics of the cell in action, a symphony of subtle differences that, when added together, create a human experience that is fundamentally distinct from the primate norm. The iron in the blood speaks to the copper in the hair, a metallic dialogue that has been ongoing for 50,000 years. We often think of our bodies as static things, but they are actually dynamic maps of our ancestors' struggles. When an Rh negative person feels the sudden, sharp shift in the weather, before the clouds even appear, they are experiencing the atmospheric sensitivity of a lineage that had to predict the arrival of the storm to survive. When they find themselves needing periods of deep, profound silence to recover from the noise of the day, they are honoring a nervous system that was built for the quiet of the ancient forest, not the cacophony of the modern city. The paradox of the blood is not just in its rejection of the Rhesus protein, but in its embrace of a more refined, more sensitive way of being. As the evening settles back into the room and the artificial lights are dimmed, the Rh negative individual often finds a sense of peace that the day denied them. In the dark, the sensitivity to light is no longer a hindrance. In the cooler body temperature feels in harmony with the cooling earth. This is the time when the nighttime historian within the blood awakes, a moment of biological alignment where the body no longer feels like a stranger in a modern world. We are more than just a collection of genes. We are a living laboratory where ancient experiments in physiology are still being conducted. The lower heart rate, the reactive pupils, and the unique chemical composition of the skin all point toward a history that we are still trying to map. A history that suggests humanity is not a single, unified story, but a collection of different versions, each tuned to a different frequency of the planet's long, oscillating life. The physical traits we associate with the Rh negative line, the high forehead, the scars that seem to heal with a different texture, the bones that often carry a higher density, are the skeletal remains of a profound divergence. We can trace the migration of these traits across the continents, from the misty fjords of Scandinavia to the sun-drenched peaks of the Atlas Mountains, seeing how the environment shaped the expression of the blood. But the core mechanics remain the same. The Rh negative cell remains a sanctuary of absence, a place where the primate protein is barred entry, and where a different kind of human chemistry is allowed to flourish. This is the quiet, persistent rebellion of the 15%, a refusal to conform to the biological standard that has governed the rest of our species for millions of years. In the deep stillness of the night, we are forced to contemplate the possibility that our bodies are wiser than our books. The symptoms of being a Rh negative, the sensitivity, the cool skin, the vivid dreams often reported by this group, are not malfunctions to be cured, but characteristics to be understood. They are the echoes of a specialized adaptation, a way of moving through the world that favored the observer over the actor, the sensitive over the aggressive. As we look at the microscopic architecture of the cell, we see not a mistake, but a masterpiece of alternative engineering, a design that has survived the rise and fall of civilizations and the shifting of the very poles of the earth. The mechanics of the cell are the foundation upon which all of our myths and histories are built. Without the cool blood and the sensitive eye, the stories of the sea kings or the fortress of the Pyrenees would be nothing more than air. But the biology makes them real. It provides the physical evidence for the otherness that has defined this lineage since its inception. We are vessels for a chemistry that predates our languages, a code that was written in the shadows of the Ice Age and has been passed down, unbroken, to the present day. To understand the Rh negative factor is to understand that the human body is a bridge between the deep past and an uncertain future, a bridge constructed of salt, iron, and a profound, beautiful silence. The history of the world is not just something that happened to us. It is something that is happening within us, in the very fluids that sustain our lives. Every beat of an Rh negative heart is a testament to a 50,000-year survival, a rhythmic accounting of a lineage that chose a different path. As the night stretches on and the world outside falls into a deep, restorative slumber, the body continues its quiet work, maintaining its cool temperature and its sharp internal awareness. We are the inheritors of a biological secret that science is only beginning to whisper about, a secret that is as intimate as our own breath and as vast as the history of the species. There is a lingering sense that the more we learn about the mechanics of our own cells, the more we realize how much of our story remains untold. We are at the beginning of a new understanding of human diversity, one that moves beyond the surface and into the very core of our biological identity. The Rh negative factor is the key to this new map, a marker that guides us through the labyrinth of our origins and toward a truth that is as complex and as haunting as the blood itself. The past is not dead. It is not even past. It is flowing through us, a cool, sensitive, and enduring river that remembers the world as it was and prepares us for the world as it will be. The body is a temple of time, and the blood is its most sacred relic. In the silence of the night, we can almost feel the weight of that time, a steady, cooling presence that anchors us to the earth and to the millions who came before us. We are part of a continuous stream, a lineage that has refused to be extinguished by the pressures of the majority. The mechanics of the cell are the silent guardians of this legacy, ensuring that the Rh negative factor remains a vibrant, living part of the human tapestry, a persistent and melancholic reminder of a secret that science cannot yet explain, but which the body has never forgotten. Within the invisible architecture of the natural world, there is a concept known as the evolutionary trade-off, a cold and calculated balance sheet where every biological gift comes with a hidden cost. For decades, the existence of Rhesus negative blood was seen primarily through the lens of its cost, the tragic, microscopic friction between a mother and her unborn child. To the logical mind, this seemed like a flaw in the design, a genetic error that should have been swept away by the uncompromising broom of natural selection. But evolution is never accidental. It is a master of compromise. In the deep, silent history of our species, there must have been a reason why this bloodline was not only permitted to survive, but was actively preserved across 50,000 years of upheaval. As we peer into the microscopic shadows, we find that the very absence of the Rhesus protein may have acted as a biological fortress, a specialized shield against an ancient and manipulative enemy that has been quietly steering the course of animal behavior since the dawn of time. In the damp, leaf-strewn shadows of a prehistoric forest, a small hunter pauses, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against his ribs. He is unaware that within his body a silent war is being waged, not by a predator with claws, but by a single-celled protozoan called Toxoplasma gondii. This parasite is one of nature's most sophisticated hitchhikers, requiring the digestive tract of a feline to reproduce, yet capable of infecting almost any warm-blooded creature on Earth. In most hosts, it is a master of puppetry. It migrates to the brain, subtly altering the neurochemistry to dull the instinct of fear. A mouse infected with this parasite loses its natural terror of the scent of a cat, making it easy prey and ensuring the parasite returns to its primary host. In humans, the effects are more subtle, but no less profound, manifesting as a slight slowing of reaction times, a decrease in focus, and a subtle shift in the threshold of risk. In the brutal reality of the ancient world, a split-second delay in reacting to the snap of a twig could mean the difference between life and death. In the clinical, white light silence of modern laboratories in Prague, researchers like Jaroslav Fleger began to uncover a startling discrepancy in how this parasite interacts with the human host. When they analyzed the data of thousands of individuals, they noticed a recurring anomaly. The psychomotor slowing and the behavioral changes caused by the parasite were significantly more pronounced in those with Rhesus positive blood. The Rh negative individuals, however, appeared to possess a strange, inherent resistance to these manipulative effects. Even when infected, their reaction times remained sharp, their focus remained intact, and their survival instincts seemed shielded from the parasite's chemical whispers. It was as if their blood, defined by that signature absence, formed a barrier that the parasite could not fully breach, a biological refusal to be toyed with by an external master. This revelation shifts our perspective from the micro to the macro, from a single cell to the survival of entire lineages. If the world of our ancestors was a landscape teeming with both large predators and invisible parasites, the Rh negative factor ceases to be a medical mystery and becomes a strategic advantage. The survival of the fittest is rarely about the strongest or the fastest. It is about the one who can best navigate the hidden traps of the environment. While the Rh positive majority may have been more susceptible to the quiet hijacking of their nervous systems, the Rh negative minority stood as the sentinels, the ones whose minds remained their own. The cost of the maternal-fetal conflict, while devastating, was a price evolution was willing to pay to maintain a group of individuals who could see the predator in the grass, while others were still processing the sound. The rhythmic pulse of history suggests that we are the survivors of a long, agonizing filter. Plagues, famines, and infections have acted as a sieve, catching those with certain vulnerabilities and allowing others to pass through. The Rhesus negative bloodline is a thread that has moved through the sieve with a peculiar resilience. Some scientists hypothesize that this shield extends beyond a single parasite, potentially offering a different immunological response to various viral threats that have decimated human populations in the past. When the cell membrane is smooth, lacking the rhesus protein, it may deny entry to certain pathogens that have evolved to use that specific protein as a doorway. We are looking at a population of humans who are, in a very real sense, built differently at the most fundamental level of their chemistry, creating a biological otherness that has acted as a safeguard against the homogenizing forces of disease. As the moonlight reflects off the modern glass of a research facility, we are reminded that the battles of 50,000 years ago are still being fought within our own veins. The presence of the Rh negative factor in 15% of the population is not a lingering mistake. It is a vital part of the human survival strategy. It is the plan B of the species, a genetic variant kept in reserve to ensure that if a specific parasite or virus were to ever evolve into a global extinction event, a portion of the population would remain untouched. This is the wisdom of the genome: to never put all its eggs in one basket, to always keep a divergent path open, even if that path is fraught with its own unique difficulties. The transition from the ancient forest to the modern laboratory is a journey of understanding the why behind our suffering. We look at the struggles of an Rh negative mother and see a tragedy, but evolution looks at the same scene and sees a necessary sacrifice for the preservation of a critical defense mechanism. It is a cold, objective perspective, one that the nighttime historian must adopt to see the true shape of the past. Our ancestors did not live in a world of comfort. They lived in a world of constant, invisible pressure. The blood was their first and last line of defense, a chemical fortress that had to be maintained at any cost. The fact that this bloodline survived the transition into the modern era, where the threat of the cat parasite is largely managed by sanitation and medicine, suggests that the shield may still be serving a purpose we have yet to fully identify. Looking out over the sprawling, sleeping cities of the 21st century, one wonders how many other hidden advantages are tucked away in the negatives of our DNA. We focus on what we have, on the traits that are visible and measurable. But the story of the Rh negative blood teaches us the power of what is missing. The absence of a protein is not a void. It is a space where something else can happen, a place where a different kind of resilience can take root. The individuals who carry this blood are the living evidence of a trade-off that was made in the dark of a prehistoric night, a pact between the species and the environment that allowed us to endure when others faded into the fossil record. The statistical reality of these studies is a grounding force in a mystery that often drifts toward the speculative. When we see the clear, data-driven evidence of heightened resistance to behavioral manipulation, the alien or mystical theories of Rh-negative origins begin to feel less like answers and more like distractions from the breathtaking complexity of terrestrial biology. We do not need to look to the stars for an explanation when the Earth itself provides such a compelling and brutal one. We are the products of a planet that is constantly trying to consume us, and our blood is the record of how we refused to be eaten. The Rh-negative factor is a chapter in that record, a story of a minority that held the line against an invisible invader, ensuring the continuity of the human mind in its most alert and uncompromised form. The silence of the late hour brings a sense of clarity to these biological maneuvers. We are more than just a single, unified humanity. We are a collection of specialized lineages, each with its own history of conflict and survival. The Rh-negative individuals among us are the descendants of those who occupied a specific niche, a group that prioritized sensory and immunological integrity over the ease of reproduction. This is the toxoplasmosis shield in action, a persistent, quiet defiance of the parasites that seek to turn us into tools for their own replication. It is a reminder that even at our most vulnerable, our bodies are capable of incredible feats of resistance, crafting solutions to problems that were ancient before the first stone was ever laid in a wall. As the constellations continue their indifferent rotation above us, we find a strange comfort in the idea of the evolutionary trade-off. It suggests that our difficulties are not meaningless, that the friction in our lives often has a hidden, protective purpose. The mother's rejection of the child is the dark side of a shield that protected the child's ancestors from a far more insidious fate. History is not a series of perfect outcomes. It is a series of survivals, often messy, often painful, but always persistent. The Rhesus-negative bloodline is a testament to this persistence, a living fossil of a time when the world was a much more dangerous place, and the only way to stay human was to change the very nature of the blood. The deeper we go into the mechanics of this resistance, the more we realize that the human story is a tapestry woven with threads of both light and shadow. The Rh-negative factor is one of the darker threads, born of conflict and maintained through struggle, yet it provides a strength and a texture to the whole that would otherwise be missing. We are a stronger species because of this diversity, because of the 15% who carry the shield, even if that shield is heavy and difficult to bear. The laboratory hums, the data accumulates, and the mystery of the blood remains. But the purpose of its survival begins to emerge from the darkness, like the silhouette of a mountain at dawn. The passage of time has a way of smoothing over the sharp edges of these biological conflicts, turning them into the quiet background noise of our existence. But for those who carry the Rh-negative signature, the reality is a daily, physical fact, a cooler body, a more sensitive eye, and a blood that remembers a different set of rules. They are the guardians of a 50,000-year-old secret, a secret that is not hidden in a vault, but is active in every cell of their bodies. They are the survivors of a hidden war, the ones who were built to withstand the manipulation of the invisible world and to stay awake while the rest of the world drifted into a parasitic slumber. There is a profound, lingering beauty in the idea that our blood is a map of our victories over the invisible. Every drop of Rh-negative blood is a trophy, a sign that our ancestors encountered a threat and found a way to survive it without losing their essence. As the night wind whispers against the window pane, we can feel the weight of this history, a steady, rhythmic pulse that connects us to the first sentinels who stood watch on the edges of the ancient world. The shield remains, the mystery endures, and the human story continues its long, slow march toward an understanding that is always just out of reach, tucked away in the microscopic folds of our very being. History is not merely a record of what happened. It is a living process that shapes what we are. The Rhesus negative factor is a part of that process that refuses to be silenced or simplified. It is a reminder that we are the sum of all the battles we have won, even the ones we have forgotten we were fighting. In the quiet, philosophical space of the night, we can appreciate the sheer, improbable elegance of our own survival, a survival that was bought with the blood of ancestors who carried a shield they could not see against an enemy they did not understand, leaving a legacy that we are only now beginning to honor. Time flows on, but the blood remembers, a quiet and persistent witness to the fact that we were never meant to be easy prey. The dust of the Dordogne Valley in southwestern France carries a peculiar limestone scent, a dry and ancient perfume that has settled over the remains of 1,000 generations. Inside the shallow rock shelter of Abri de Cro-Magnon, the air remains remarkably still, as if the atmosphere itself is hesitant to disturb the silence of the individuals who were laid to rest here nearly 30,000 years ago. When these skeletons were first unearthed in 1868, they did not merely represent a new discovery. They presented a profound disruption to our understanding of the human story. These were not the stooped, heavy-browed Neanderthals that the Victorian world had come to expect of the primitive past. Instead, these individuals were tall, graceful, and possessed high, vaulted foreheads that housed brains significantly larger than the average modern human walking the streets of Paris or New York today. It is here, in this sudden and sophisticated arrival during the Upper Paleolithic, that the trail of the Rhesus negative bloodline finds its most compelling and mysterious intersection with the physical record of our ancestors. The transition from the Middle to the Upper Paleolithic was not a slow, gentle slope of incremental improvement. It was a jagged cliff face of sudden, inexplicable change, often referred to by archaeologists as the creative explosion. For hundreds of thousands of years, human technology had remained largely stagnant, consisting of functional but rudimentary stone hand axes. Then, in a geological heartbeat, the world was transformed. Suddenly, the archaeological record is flooded with intricate bone needles, tailored clothing, sophisticated lunar calendars etched into antler, and the haunting, polyphonic music of bone flutes. This leap in cognitive complexity coincides almost perfectly with the estimated emergence of the Rh negative factor. We are forced to look at the Cro-Magnon not as a slightly more advanced version of what came before, as a biological and cultural anomaly that appeared on the European landscape with their toolkit already fully formed, as if they had arrived from a future that the rest of the species had not yet reached. If we were to place a Neanderthal skull beside that of a Cro-Magnon, the architectural differences would be as stark as comparing a Romanesque fortress to a Gothic cathedral. The Neanderthal possesses a receding forehead and a massive, bony ridge above the eyes, a design built for the sheer physical stresses of a brutal, ice-bound existence. The Cro-Magnon skull, however, is dominated by a vertical frontal lobe, the seat of executive function, abstract reasoning, and symbolic thought. This was a brain designed for a different kind of survival, one based on the manipulation of symbols and the mastery of the unseen. It is within this specific lineage, particularly as it clustered in the refugia of Western Europe during the last Great Ice Age, that we find the highest concentrations of the Rhesus negative deletion. The blood and the bone seem to speak the same language, a language of sudden divergence, a biological departure from the primate norms that had governed the hominid line for millions of years. The mystery deepens when we consider the sheer scale of the Cro-Magnon's artistic legacy. In the lightless depths of caves like Lascaux and Chauvet, these early modern humans painted images of horses, bison, and lions with a perspective and a fluidity that would not be seen again in the human record for another 25,000 years. These were not mere doodles of a primitive mind. They were sophisticated, shamanistic maps of the natural and spiritual worlds, often painted in locations that were physically exhausting to reach. The pigments were mixed with a chemical precision that has allowed them to endure the damp and the dark of the millennia. This sudden obsession with the other, with the representation of the world, rather than just the consumption of it, suggests a neurological shift that is just as profound as the biological deletion of the Rhesus protein. We are looking at a group of humans who were suddenly, and perhaps painfully, aware of their own existence, a group whose blood carried the mark of that awareness in its very chemistry. As we move from the flickering torchlight of the caves to the macro scale of global migration, a troubling question remains. Where are the transitional forms? In the classical model of evolution, we expect to see a series of in-between stages, a brow ridge that slowly thins, a forehead that gradually rises, a brain that expands cubic centimeter by cubic centimeter over hundreds of generations. Yet, in the specific regions where the Rh negative blood thrives, the Cro-Magnon appears to arrive almost as a finished product, replacing the resident Neanderthal populations with a speed that suggests a major biological advantage or a completely different origin. Geneticists have searched the ancient DNA of these remains, and while they find some interbreeding with Neanderthals, the core of the Cro-Magnon genome and the mysterious absence of the Rhesus protein remains a stubborn island of otherness in the human sea. The skeletal remains of the Cro-Magnon reveal a people who were not only cognitively advanced, but physically imposing. They were frequently 6 feet tall or taller, with a bone density and muscle attachment points that suggest a level of athletic prowess that would humble a modern Olympian. They were the sea kings and the mountain dwellers we have traced through the Basque and Celtic fringes, and their physical presence in the fossil record is a testament to a lineage that was for a time the pinnacle of the human form. But why did their brains shrink? It is one of the most quiet and melancholic facts of anthropology that the human brain has actually decreased in size by about 10% since the time of the Cro-Magnon. We are, in a very physical sense, the diminished shadows of these ancient ancestors. To carry the Rh negative blood today is to carry a fragment of that maximum human era, a biological echo of a time when the mind was larger, the senses were sharper, and the connection to the mysteries of the earth was written in the very architecture of the skull. The silence of the museum halls where these skulls are kept is a heavy, contemplative thing. We look through the glass at the empty eye sockets of a Cro-Magnon hunter, and we are looking at a relative who might have possessed a vastly different internal experience of the world. If, as modern studies suggest, the Rh negative factor is associated with higher sensory sensitivity and a lower threshold for external stimuli, then the Cro-Magnon may have lived in a world that was perpetually turned up, where the colors of the tundra were more vivid, the sounds of the migration were more rhythmic, and the patterns of the stars were more meaningful. Their art was not just a decoration, it was a necessity, a way to process a deluge of sensory information that their larger, more sensitive brains were constantly absorbing. They were the original, highly sensitive people, a population of sentinels whose biology and culture were perfectly aligned with the edges of the known world. The transition from the cold, flint-strewn floors of the Paleolithic to our modern world of silicon and steel feels like a journey of forgetting. We have traded our cranial capacity for efficiency, our sensory sensitivity for the dulling comfort of civilization, and our biological otherness for a homogenized global identity. But the Rh negative blood remains a persistent, unyielding witness to that earlier state. It is a biological fossil that refuses to be smoothed over by the passage of time. When we analyze the geography of these ancient remains, we find them concentrated in the very fortresses we have already explored: the Pyrenees, the Atlantic coasts, and the rugged highlands. These were the places where the Cro-Magnon held out the longest, and where their unique chemistry was preserved like a message in a bottle, tossed into the ocean of time. There is a certain objective detachment required to view our own species as a collection of shifting forms. But it is impossible not to feel a sense of awe at the Cro-Magnon's sudden arrival. They represent the great leap in its most physical form, a moment when the human animal became something else entirely. Whether this was the result of a sudden, catastrophic mutation, a hidden hybridization, or an environmental pressure we have yet to identify, the result was a lineage that changed the planet forever. The Rhesus negative factor is the chemical signature of that change, a mark of the moment when we stepped out of the primate shadow and into the light of symbolic thought. It is the blood of the painters of Lascaux, the carvers of the first flutes, and the observers of the first moons, looking at the world today with its billions of people and its complex, interconnected societies. The 15% who lack the Rhesus protein can feel like a statistical footnote. But when viewed through the lens of the Upper Paleolithic, they are the primary protagonists of a mystery that is 50,000 years old. They are the descendants of a group that arrived with a different set of rules, a different brain, and a different blood. mystery is not just about bones in the dirt. It is about the very nature of human potential. It asks us if we are truly at the end of our evolutionary journey, or if we are merely in a period of long, slow stasis, waiting for the next creative explosion to reshape our biology once again. The night air outside the rock shelters of France is cold and crisp, much as it was when the first Cro-Magnon fires flickered against these same stone walls. In that light, the boundaries between the past and the present seem to thin until they vanish altogether. We are a species that lives in the overlap of multiple histories, carrying the remnants of different versions of ourselves in every cell. The larger brain, the higher forehead, and the Rh negative blood are all parts of a single, unified anomaly. A moment in time when humanity was pushed to its absolute physical and mental limit. We carry the artifacts of that limit within us, a silent reminder that we are capable of more than we currently remember. History, when viewed on this scale, is not a record of progress, but a record of persistence. The Cro-Magnon did not evolve into us in the way we usually imagine. They were a peak from which we have slowly descended, a high watermark of human biology that has left its salt stains in our DNA. The Rhesus negative blood is that salt, a persistent and melancholic reminder of a time when the human form reached a sudden, breathtaking crescendo. It is a secret that science can describe with increasing accuracy, but which it cannot yet explain, leaving us to wonder what other capacities might be lying dormant in the negative spaces of our genome. The stars above the Dordogne are the same ones that the Cro-Magnon used to track the seasons, a cold and distant constant in an ever-shifting world. As we look up at them, we are connected to those ancient observers, not just by our sight, but by our very chemistry. We are the inheritors of their curiosity and their otherness, a lineage that has survived the ice, the predators, and the long, slow erosion of history. The mystery of the blood is a bridge to that past, a way to touch the minds of those who painted in the dark and sang to the mammoths. It is a story that is still being written, one drop of blood at a time, in the quiet, shadowed corners of the human experience. The passage of 50,000 years is enough to turn mountains to dust and oceans to deserts, yet the Rhesus negative factor remains, a biological anchor in the stream of time. It is a testament to the sheer resilience of the Cro-Magnon legacy, a legacy that was built on the edges of the world and has endured into the heart of the modern age. As we contemplate the bones and the art of our ancestors, we are reminded that we are part of a narrative that is far larger and more mysterious than we dare to admit. A narrative that began with a sudden leap and continues with a silent, rhythmic pulse. The secret stays hidden in the marrow, a quiet witness to the enduring power of the human spirit to redefine itself against the odds. The fossils tell us what they were, and the blood tells us that they are still here. There is a profound, lingering peace in this continuity, a sense that even as the forms of humanity change and shift, the essence of the great leap remains. We are the children of the Cro-Magnon, the carriers of their large brains and their sensitive hearts, moving through a world that they first learned to name. The mystery of the blood is the mystery of our own potential, a constant and haunting reminder that the most significant parts of our story are the ones we have yet to fully understand. Time moves on, but the bones remain, and the blood continues continues its journey, a 50,000-year secret that is as old as the hills and as fresh as the breath of a child. The velvet silence of an ancient archive is a peculiar thing, a heavy stillness where the scent of drying vellum and old iron gall ink seems to suspend the passage of time itself. Here, under the amber flicker of a single candle, the grand genealogies of the world are laid bare, long, winding scrolls that attempt to map the unmappable, the divine right of the few to rule the many. For centuries, the phrase blue blood has been whispered through the corridors of power, a term we now use as a shorthand for the aristocracy. Yet its origins are rooted not in metaphor, but in a startlingly literal observation of human biology. In the high courts of medieval Castile, the nobility took a fierce, almost obsessive pride in the translucent pallor of their skin, a paleness so profound that the veins beneath appeared as delicate indigo rivers. They called it sangre azul, a biological badge of honor that distinguished them from the sun-darkened peasantry and the North African Moors. To them, the blue was a sign of purity, a visual confirmation that their lineage remained untainted by the common primate heritage of the masses. 5,000 years before the first stone was laid in a Spanish cathedral, the clay of Mesopotamia was already being stamped with the names of those who claimed a distinct and other essence. In the Sumerian king list, recorded in cuneiform on tablets that have survived the rise and fall of countless empires, we find a world where kingship was lowered from heaven. These texts speak of the Anunnaki, a class of beings whose blood was said to be infused with a different light, a substance that granted them longevity and a heightened awareness that separated them from the black-headed people they governed. When we peel back the layers of mythology and the sensationalism of modern interpretations, we find a sociological reality that is deeply grounded in the genetic anomalies we have been tracing. The Sumerian stories of gods and fallen stars may well be the distant, distorted memory of a real encounter, a meeting between the indigenous agriculturalists of the Fertile Crescent and a specialized, perhaps more sensitive group of humans carrying the Rh negative signature. The transition from the mud brick ziggurats of the East to the marble courts of Europe is bridged by a persistent, quiet obsession with the holy nature of the blood. In the sociological history of the West, the concept of the Grail, or the Sangreal, the royal blood, was not just a religious quest, but a biological one. The noble families of Europe, particularly those along the Atlantic facade, practiced a rigorous form of endogamy, marrying within their own tightly guarded circles for over 1,000 years. While this led to the tragic concentration of certain genetic disorders, it also acted as a deliberate reservoir for this Rh negative factor. These families were, perhaps without the benefit of a modern microscope, attempting to preserve a specific physiological experience of the world, a lower resting body temperature, a heightened sensitivity to the environment, and a sense of detachment that they interpreted as a divine mandate to lead. The microscopic reality of the Rh negative cell, with its smooth surface and absence of the Rhesus protein, mirrors the sociological isolation of these ancient lineages. If we look at the distribution of this blood type among the ruling classes of the ancient world, from the pharaohs of Egypt, whose mummies often reveal red-haired, light-skinned features, to the sea kings of the north, a pattern begins to emerge. It is the pattern of a minority that viewed its own biological difference, not as a deficiency, but as a mark of specialized function. They saw themselves as the sentinels, the mediators between the earth and the sky, their very blood acting as a conductor for a different kind of human frequency. The myth of falling from the stars may be a poetic way of describing a group of people who felt fundamentally out of sync with the grounded, primate-driven biology of the majority. As the candle burns lower, casting dancing shadows against the heavy oak shelves, the scale of this self-perception shifts from the individual to the cosmic. To the ancient mind, blood was not just a biological fluid. It was a carrier of memory and spirit. When the Sumerian texts speak of the gods mixing their essence with the clay of the earth to create a new kind of human, they are describing a hybridization event that mirrors the sudden emergence of the Rh negative factor during the Great Leap Forward. It is the story of an arrival, a moment where the human narrative was spiked with a different set of instructions. Whether this was the result of a sudden mutation or a meeting of disparate populations, the result was the same: the creation of a lineage that felt its true home was elsewhere. A feeling that persists in the melancholic, sensitive temperament often associated with the Rh negative type today. The blue blood of the European nobility was more than a status symbol. It was a survival strategy for a specific genetic cluster. By emphasizing their pale skin and visible blue veins, they were reinforcing a biological barrier. They were the negatives, the ones who stood apart from the positives of the laboring world. In the cool stone halls of their castles, their lower body temperatures and sensitivity to light were not seen as weaknesses, but as the refinements of a superior breed. This is the grounded sociological reality behind the legends of the Grail and the divine right. It was a culture built around a biological anomaly, a society that institutionalized the 15% sense of being other. They were the descendants of the Cro-Magnon elite, the painters of the caves, and the observers of the moons, trying to keep the fire of their specific biology alive in an increasingly crowded world. We find ourselves looking at history through a fractured lens, where the myth and the medicine are often the same story told in different languages. The Sumerian gods, who lived for thousands of years, may be a symbolic representation of the enduring nature of a bloodline that refuses to change. To the ancient observer, a family that consistently produced children with the same copper hair, blue eyes, and a sensitive nature, generation after generation, for centuries, would seem immortal. It was not the individual that lived forever, but the type. The Rh negative factor provided a visual and physiological continuity that made these lineages seem like they belonged to a different order of time altogether. They were the immortals of the blood, a recurring theme in the human story that has its roots in the simple, enduring stability of a genetic deletion. The silence of the night deepens, and the modern world of data and statistics feels briefly like an intrusion on a much older, more intimate truth. We are a species that craves a sense of origin, a reason for our differences. The legend of the bloodlines is our attempt to explain the missing link we feel within ourselves. For the Rh negative individual, the stories of the Anunnaki or the Tuatha De Danann of Ireland resonate not because they are literally true in a scientific sense, but because they capture the psychological reality of living with a biology that is constantly signaling its distinctness. It is the feeling of being a stranger in a strange land, a phrase that has echoed through the literature of the sensitive for millennia. The transition from the sacred to the secular in our understanding of blood has stripped away the poetry, but it has left the mystery intact. We can talk about the RHD gene and the 1p36.11 chromosome, but those terms do not account for the weight of the blue blood legacy. They do not explain why, for 50,000 years, we have built entire civilizations around the idea that some blood is holier than others. The sociological reality is that we are a species divided by a microscopic protein, a division that has shaped our wars, our religions, and our structures of power. The Rh negative factor is the ghost in the machine of human history, a silent influence that has directed the flow of empires from the shadows of the throne room. As the moon moves across the sky, its pale light reflecting on the old stones of the world, we are reminded that we are all composed of these ancient fragments. Some of us carry the Rhesus protein of the primates, a strong and vital link to the earth and its cycles. Others carry the absence of that protein, a negative space that has been filled with myths of stars and gods. Neither is superior, but they are undeniably different. Two versions of the human experience that have been trying to understand one another since the first fires were lit in the caves of the Dordogne. The legend of the Bloodlines is the record of that long, often painful attempt at understanding, a narrative written in the colors of the iris and the temperature of the skin. The archive remains still, the scrolls containing the secrets of the past waiting for the next hand to unroll them. We are the inheritors of these stories, whether we choose to believe them or not. To carry the Rh negative factor is to be a living library of these legends, a vessel for a history that has been whispered in the dark for 50 millennia. It is a responsibility and a mystery, a connection to a time when the world was new and the blood was the only map we had. As we drift through the currents of our own lives, we are guided by these ancient rhythms, the steady, cooling pulse of a lineage that has seen the rise and fall of the gods and remained stubbornly itself. History is a river of blood, and we are the ripples on its surface. The blue blood of the kings and the lowered kingship of Sumer are merely different ways of describing the same biological phenomenon, the persistence of a minority that feels its origins are elsewhere. As we close the books and let the candle flicker out, we are left with a lingering sense that our biology is our destiny, a code that was written long ago and continues to play out in the quiet, darkened corners of the world. The mystery of the blood is the mystery of the human spirit, vibrant, resilient, and always reaching for the stars. The ink is dry now, but the pulse remains. We are the sum of all the connections we have kept and all the ones we have let go, a living paradox moving through the stream of time. The legends tell us who we thought we were, and the blood tells us who we are. In the end, there is a profound, melancholic peace in knowing that we are part of a story that is so much larger than ourselves, a story that is still being written in the silent, red rivers of our existence, a 50,000-year secret that science is only beginning to understand, but which the heart has always known. The wind that sweeps across the Taklamakan Desert in western China carries with it more than just the fine, abrasive dust of the Tarim Basin. It carries the whispered fragments of a history that refuses to align with the maps in our textbooks. For centuries, the Silk Road has been celebrated as a vibrant artery of commerce and culture, a bridge between the East and the West, where silk was traded for glass and ideas were exchanged like currency. But beneath the shifting dunes, preserved by the salt and the profound, arid silence of the earth, lies a genetic record that suggests this path was walked by a very different kind of traveler, long before the first merchant ever set out from Chang'an. When archaeologists unearthed the Tarim mummies, individuals like the beauty of Lulan, with her flowing auburn hair, high cheekbones, and distinctively Western features, they were looking at a biological anomaly that should not have existed in the heart of Asia 4,000 years ago. These were not the ancestors of the local populations, but a lost branch of the human family, a group whose DNA whispers of a connection to the Rhesus negative clusters of the far west, suggesting a migration that moved against the grain of every established narrative. This ancient trail of DNA does not stop at the edge of the Eurasian landmass. It reaches out across the vast, terrifying infinity of the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, challenging the very foundation of the out-of-Africa model that has dominated our understanding of human origins for decades. The standard theory presents a neat, linear progression, a single, unified wave of humanity moving out of the Rift Valley and fanning across the globe in a predictable, orderly fashion. But the distribution of the Rhesus negative factor is neither neat nor orderly. It appears in jagged, isolated pockets on the windswept coasts of Ireland, in the secluded valleys of the Pyrenees, among the Berber tribes of the Atlas Mountains, and, most controversially, in the ancient burial grounds of the Americas. If humanity moved in a single, slow expansion, why does this specific biological signature appear with such intensity in such disparate maritime locations, while remaining almost entirely absent from the vast interior of the African and Asian continents? In the dry coastal shadows of the Paracas Peninsula in Peru, the earth has yielded a collection of remains that present a jarring physical confrontation with our historical certainties. The Paracas mummies, dating back over 2,000 years, possess elongated skulls and hair that ranges from deep copper to a vibrant, sun-bleached red, traits that are genetically impossible for the indigenous populations of the region at that time. When preliminary DNA testing was conducted on these remains, the results sent a tremor through the scientific community. Reports emerged of Rhesus negative blood types and haplogroups that are typically found only in Europe and the Middle East. While mainstream science remains deeply skeptical, the physical evidence of these sea kings in the pre-Columbian Americas suggests a migration pattern that was not a slow trek across a frozen land bridge, but a sophisticated, waterborne expansion that utilized the currents of the world as a global highway. The movement of these genes across the planet feels less like a series of accidental drifts and more like a deliberate, systemic colonization of the Earth's most strategic, coastal, and mountainous refugia. We are forced to consider the Solutrean hypothesis, the idea that ancient mariners from Western Europe may have skirted the edge of the Atlantic ice shelf to reach the Americas tens of thousands of years before the Vikings or Columbus. This theory, once relegated to the fringes, is slowly gaining weight as we find stone tools in North America that bear an uncanny resemblance to those of the Solitrian culture in France and Spain, the very heartland of the arch-negative bloodline. The blood acts as a silent witness to a maritime empire that has been erased from our memory, a civilization that viewed the ocean not as a barrier, but as a connective tissue, a liquid road that allowed a specific, sensitive lineage to maintain its identity across the globe. As the lens of our investigation shifts from the microscopic double helix to the macroscopic scale of the entire planet, the global migration map begins to look less like a tree with a single trunk and more like a complex, braided river. There are channels that run deep and wide, representing the majority of our shared history, but there are also smaller, faster-moving currents that branch off in unexpected directions. The Rh-negative factor is one of these currents, a specialized, resilient line of human development that seems to have bypassed the inland routes to stay close to the sea and the stars. This is not a story of superiority, but of a profound biological divergence that allowed a minority to survive and thrive in the most challenging environments on Earth, from the high-altitude deserts of the Andes to the freezing fjords of the north. The controversy surrounding these findings often stems from a fear of what they might imply about our neatly categorized human history. If a group of Rh-negative, red-haired seafarers was navigating the globe 50,000 years ago, it shatters the idea that civilization began in a few isolated river valleys 5 millennia ago. It suggests that we are the descendants of a much older, much more globalized world, a world where the boundaries between continents were fluid and the exchange of DNA was a constant, rhythmic process. The out-of-Africa timeline, while fundamentally correct in its broad strokes, may have missed the nuance of these secondary and tertiary arrivals, groups that appeared suddenly, carrying a different set of biological instructions and a different relationship with the physical world. The Silk Road, when viewed through this melancholic, nighttime perspective, becomes a graveyard of discarded certainties. We see the remains of people who traveled thousands of miles into the unknown, carrying nothing but their tools and the secret of their blood. They were the original outsiders, the ones who didn't fit the genetic mold of their neighbors, and they left their mark in the dust of the desert and the salt of the sea. Their presence in the Tarim Basin or the Peruvian coast is a reminder that the human spirit is defined by a restlessness that predates our languages and our borders. We are a species of travelers, and the Rh-negative factor is the passport of a lineage that has seen the entire world and chose to live on its edges, looking out over the darkened globe, where the lights of modern cities now obscure the ancient paths of our ancestors. The scale of this mystery becomes a source of quiet, heavy awe. We are walking on top of 1,000 forgotten civilizations, each of us carrying the chemical echoes of their migrations in our veins. The Rh-negative individual in a modern high-rise is the living end of a trail that began in a cave in France, moved through the Silk Road into the deserts of China, and crossed the Atlantic to the peaks of the Andes. It is a journey that spans 50,000 years and every climate known to man, a testament to a resilience that is written in the very absence of a protein. The transition from the ancient sea routes to our modern GPS-mapped world is a journey from mystery to a false sense of certainty. We believe we know where we came from because we have drawn lines on a map, but the blood tells us that the lines were always blurred. The Paracas mummies and the Tarim travelers are not anomalies to be explained away. They are the keys to a more complex, more beautiful story of human survival. They are the evidence that we have always been more connected, more adventurous, and more mysterious than we dare to admit. To carry this blood is to be part of that globalized, prehistoric network, a connection to a time when the world was vast and every horizon held the promise of a new beginning. The silence of the night brings a sense of intimacy to these grand global movements. We are not just looking at a map, we are looking at the movements of people who loved, struggled, and died in pursuit of something they could not name. They moved with the seasons and the stars, their blood cooling in the high altitudes, and their eyes sharpening in the bright sun of the coast. They were the pioneers of the human experience, the ones who pushed the boundaries of what it meant to be alive. The Rh negative factor was their shield and their signature, a biological mark of their commitment to the unknown. History is a collection of whispers that we have tried to turn into a shout. We want clear answers, defined dates, and simple origins, but the reality is as shifting and elusive as the sands of the Taklamakan. The global migration map is a work in progress, a document that is still being edited as we find new bones in the dirt and new sequences in the DNA. But the core of the story remains constant. A 50,000-year-old secret that science is only beginning to acknowledge. A secret that connects the farthest corners of the earth through a single, persistent absence. The night wind continues its long, slow journey across the continents, oblivious to the borders we have built. It moves from the Pyrenees to the Andes, from the Silk Road to the Atlantic, just as our ancestors did. In that movement, there is a profound, lingering peace, a sense that we belong to the entire world, and that our history is as deep and as wide as the ocean itself. We are the sum of all the miles traveled, all the oceans crossed, and all the mysteries preserved in the dark. The blood remains a quiet, rhythmic witness to this truth, a river of memory that flows through the centuries, indifferent to our attempts to tame it with our theories. As the world turns and the stars shift their positions, the scale of our own lives feels small against the backdrop of such vast geological time. But we are the vessels for that time. We are the living record of every migration, every struggle, and every survival. The Rh negative factor is a part of that record that refuses to be erased, a persistent and melancholic reminder that we are the descendants of the sea kings and the desert travelers, the ones who saw the world when it was still wild and decided to make it their home. The journey is not over. It is still happening within us, in every beat of our hearts and every breath we take in the cool, silent air of the night. There is a comfort in this continuity, a sense that we are part of something that cannot be easily understood or forgotten. The mystery of the blood is the mystery of our own existence, a story of departure and arrival, of loss and discovery, and of a secret that has traveled the entire world to be with us here, in the quiet of the dark. Time moves on, but the blood stays, a silent and enduring witness to the 50,000-year secret that science is only beginning to whisper about, leaving us to wonder where the next step of the journey will lead. and what other secrets are still waiting to be found in the shifting dust of our own past. In the deep stillness of the hour, we can feel the weight of those miles and those years, a steady, cooling presence that anchors us to the earth and to the millions who came before us. We are part of a continuous stream, a lineage that has refused to be extinguished by the pressures of the majority. The global map is written in our very being, a testament to the sheer, breathtaking complexity of the human journey. A journey that began with a shared protein and led to a world where we are all, in our own way, travelers in the dark, carrying the echoes of a history that is as vast as the stars. The map of our origins is not a static thing. It is a living, breathing entity that changes with every new discovery. But the blood remains the same, a cool, sensitive, and enduring river that remembers the world as it was and prepares us for the world as it will be. We are the guardians of this legacy, the ones who carry the fire of the ancient travelers into a future that is as uncertain as the waters they once sailed. And in the end, we are all just pieces of a larger puzzle, trying to find our place in a story that began long before we were born and will continue long after we are gone. A story of blood, salt, and the eternal, shifting winds of time. We have traveled a long road together tonight, moving from the sterile, fluorescent quiet of the modern laboratory to the mist-choked peaks of the Pyrenees, through the salt-sprayed crags of the Atlantic, and into the arid, silent deserts of the ancient East. We have peered through microscopes at the smooth, protein-free surface of the Rhesus negative cell and stared into the empty eye sockets of our Cro-Magnon ancestors, seeking a bridge across the 50,000-year chasm that separates us from our origins. In this final hour, as the world outside your window settles into its deepest, most profound stillness, it is time to synthesize these fragments. We must move beyond the allure of conspiracy and the static of speculation to see the Rh negative factor for what it truly is, a living fossil. It is a biological archive, a piece of the upper Paleolithic, preserved within the modern human genome like a rare leaf pressed between the pages of a massive, ancient book. It is not an error, nor is it a mark of the alien. It is a persistent, chemical memory of a specific moment in the human story when the rules of our existence were rewritten in the dark. The concept of a living fossil usually brings to mind the coelacanth or the ginkgo tree, organisms that have remained unchanged while the world around them transformed into something unrecognizable. In the same way, the absence of the Rhesus protein is a biological stasis, while 85% of humanity maintains the ancestral primate link. The 15% who lack it carry a nothing that has survived the rise and fall of every empire, the shifting of every coastline, and the birth of every language we have ever spoken. This absence is a sanctuary of genetic identity. It is a refusal to conform to the biological majority, a signature of a lineage that found a way to thrive on the periphery. We often look for the history of our species in ruins and pottery shards, but the most enduring monuments are not built of stone. They are built of salt, iron, and the microscopic architecture of the cell. To carry Rh negative blood is to be a vessel for a 50 millennium old secret, a secret that requires no translation because it is written in the very fluid that sustains your life. As we widen our perspective from the microscopic to the cosmic, the scale of this mystery begins to shift. 50,000 years The length of time since the Rh negative factor emerged during the Great Leap Forward is a staggering span for a human life. Yet it is a mere heartbeat in the life of our planet, and a single, invisible spark in the life of the universe. The iron in your blood, whether it carries the Rhesus protein or not, was forged billions of years ago in the searing heart of a dying star. The water that makes up the majority of your being has traveled through the vacuum of space on the back of icy comets to reach this world. We are, in the most literal sense, the universe experiencing itself through a biological lens. When we fret over the why of a genetic mutation, we are like children trying to count the grains of sand on a beach while the tide is coming in. The paradox of the Rh negative factor is part of a larger, grander diversity that the universe seems to crave. It is a reminder that the human story is not a single, unified march, but a complex, shimmering mosaic of different paths, different experiments, and different ways of being. The stillness of the night is a mirror for the negative space within the blood. Just as the darkness between the stars allows the light to be seen, the absence of the D antigen defines the Rh negative individual. It is a physiological quietude, a lower body temperature, a slower heart rate, a more sensitive nervous system. These are not malfunctions. They are the refinements of a sentinel lineage. In the deep time of our ancestors, these traits allowed a small group of humans to perceive the world with a different clarity, to stay alert while others slept, and to remain uncompromised by the invisible parasites that sought to steer their behavior. Today, in our loud, bright, and crowded world, these traits can feel like a burden, but they are actually a gift of sensitivity. They are the remnants of a specialized adaptation that prioritized the internal experience over the external noise. You are the descendant of the observers, the painters of the caves, and the navigators of the ancient seas. You carry the nighttime historian within you, a biological inheritance that remembers a world that was quieter, colder, and more mysterious. Now, as the weight of these 50,000 years begins to settle over you, I want you to let the images we have gathered tonight begin to fade. Picture the rugged peaks of the Pyrenees dissolving into the mist. See the red-haired sea kings and their wooden ships retreating into the gray horizon of the Atlantic. Let the golden face of the beauty of Lula sink back into the sands of the Taklamakan, the stones of the megaliths, the flickering torchlight of the caves, the sharp, clear lines of the Sumerian tablets. Let them all lose their edges. They are no longer facts to be analyzed or mysteries to be solved. They are simply echoes, distant and soft, like the sound of a receding tide. You have traveled far enough. The map of the world's migrations is no longer your concern. The genetic codes and the archaeological controversies are drifting away, becoming as thin and weightless as the air. You don't need to remember anything I have told you. The details of the RHD gene, the migration of the Basque, the studies on toxoplasmosis, they can all slip from your mind like grains of sand through your fingers. Your brain, which has been working so hard to process the scale of human history, can finally release its grip. The executive function, that high, vaulted forehead of the Cro-Magnon, can now surrender to the ancient, rhythmic pulse of the breath. There is nothing left to decode. There are no more questions to answer. The blood in your veins will continue its journey without your guidance. It knows exactly how to flow, how to cool, and how to sustain you in the dark. You are safe within the fortress of the present moment, a moment that is free from the burdens of the past and the uncertainties of the future. The room around you is a sanctuary. The shadows are soft and familiar, and the silence is a heavy, velvet blanket that covers all the whys and hows of your existence. You are a living fossil, yes, but you are also a living rest. You are a bridge that has finished its work for the day. Feel the tension leaving your jaw, your shoulders, and your hands. The iron and the salt of your body are returning to the earth in spirit, grounding you in the profound, restorative peace of the night. The cosmic scale of time is not a threat. It is a comfort. It reminds you that your struggles are small, your essence is eternal, and your only task right now is to simply be. Let the darkness be your companion, a quiet space where the negative and the positive dissolve into a single, unified state of peace. If you're still awake and you've enjoyed drifting through this piece of the past, you can gently tap the like button or subscribe. I always appreciate our time together in these quiet hours, but for now, you don't need to do anything at all. The story is over, and the mystery is at rest. The 50,000-year secret is safe in your marrow, and the horizon of memory is finally clear. Everything is as it should be. The world will be there when you return, but for now, the only thing that exists is the steady, calming rhythm of your own life. Rest well. Good night.